Okay, so here we go again, launching into a huge philosophical question, which is at the foundation of whether or not God exists. And the connection between morality and God is an important one because traditionally, as you know, if you've studied legal codes, most of the earliest legal codes all come in some manner or another directly from God. So we're going to be looking at the question of morality today. So if you think about morality, you can say, well, morality is just an idea of right and wrong, that it comes out of a particular society. So it's there's moral relativism at the heart of any moral system. What we think is right is just because it's what our parents told us, or it was what society tells us, or it's what our legal codes tell us. So the question really is, do you believe in universal moral concepts? Are there certain things that are overarchingly right or wrong, regardless of the social context you find yourself in? The other question is, how do you define morality? Is it just the laws that you're given? And where do those laws come from, starting at the very beginning? And what's the reason why there are certain moral codes that exist across societies? Is there a universal moral consciousness in humans? If we look at the religious context for morality, we see the cardinal virtues and the deadly sins, what's good and what's bad as defined by the church. We have the commandments, which is the basis of Western law. So when you think about your own beliefs, you need to think about, there are three possibilities for the existence of morality. Basically, it exists only by chance, doesn't really exist, so there is no higher law. It's just all fabrications that societies make to keep us from doing terrible things to one another. It's a man-made construction, so it's totally socially constructed, which is sort of a variation of number one. Or it's the product of an intelligence or a higher moral force, and it is a form of some kind of commandment. And if it's a commandment, if you view it that way, the implication of that is that you believe that there is a higher principle at work. And if you believe that, that gets you closer to a belief in God. So that's why these connections are between morality and religion are extremely important. So what I'd like you to do if you're working in a virtual setting is to make a list of the things that you consider to be virtues and the things that you consider to be sins. I know that these are not words that we tend to use because they're explicitly religious, but you might want to use just the word good and bad emotions. It's interesting because the Puritans said God loves adverbs, right? Not only what you do, but how you do it matters. When you're looking at good and evil, it's about intention as well as action. So I want you to think about that. I'm asking you about states of being as much as actions. So actually, this is more about states of being than actions, but it's, if you want to think about actions, what states of being leads to those actions. So if you look at the problem of evil, the fundamental question that religious people have to deal with is, well, why is it there in the first place? Why would God let terrible things happen to good people? Something that happens every day. Why would God allow us to be evil? It's the fundamental issue that comes out of the story of Adam and Eve, right? Why would they choose to defy God and do something wrong? And the interesting answer to that is, one of the most common answers to this is, well, it's the byproduct of having free will. You have a choice. You can do good and you can do bad. And so since God gave us a choice of good and bad, therefore the ability to do good is implicitly connected to the ability to do bad. So we have to have both. And we live in a moral world. If you believe this, you believe everything you do has a moral consequence. It's probably the way a lot of you were raised, whether you lived in a religious family or not. It's important, right? Your choices that you make, the things that you do day to day matter, or they should matter. And you can believe that even if you don't necessarily believe in God, just if you want to be a good person. So I like these sets of quotations here. People aren't evil and people aren't good, right? They are a combination of things. And we have both of them in us. So obviously, what does evil imply about the existence of God? You could say, well, evil may just imply that God doesn't exist, but you could also say that evil is gives us the choice. So we can look at that from two different belief systems. The implications of the existence of God on the existence of evil is interesting, because if you believe in moral concepts, as we said before, then you're going to get closer to belief in God. So if you look at the traditional 7 cardinal virtues and the 7 deadly sins, again, if you're working virtually, what I would ask you to do is to think about which is the worst of the sins and which is the most important of the virtues. So if you don't know what all these things are, prudence is obviously how you weigh up decisions. So to be prudent is to be thoughtful, if you think about it that way. Temperance is self-control. It's traditionally connected to the drinking of alcohol, right? So if you're not temperate, it means that you're drinking a lot. Justice, I think, is obvious, right? Do you weigh up good and bad in your life? Fortitude is moral strength. Faith is belief in something bigger than yourself. On the other side, gluttony is indulging in your appetites, right? It could be food, usually is. It could also involve drinking. You'll notice that there's a connection between the left and the right. If you look at, they balance each other out. Lust is overindulging sexually. Pride is having too much ego and being too preoccupied with yourself. I think we all know what envy is. Avarice is acquiring material things for no other purpose than wanting to be rich, for example. That's avarice. So greed, it's another way of thinking about what greed is. So think about what are the most important virtues, the worst sins. And I want you to also think about, from a religious perspective, how you would answer that question, because there is a right answer to that, which I will share with you at some point. So looking at it again from a religious perspective, maybe this will give away the question I just asked. But if you look at who Lucifer was, if you know your if you know your Christian theology, you know that Lucifer was the right-hand angel of God, who basically worked alongside of God, sort of his literally his right-hand presence. And Lucifer began to challenge God, thinking that he was actually above him, maybe a little smarter, a little bit more able to do right by humanity. So he challenges God's power and place and ends up being cast into hell. So Lucifer, as you know, kind of rules over hell, and his original sin was to have the power and mind of God. And if you think about what sin that is, I'll leave that to you to figure that one out. But if you think about that, it suggests what our greatest moral weakness is. And you could say, well, from a religious perspective, it means not believing in God. But from a non-religious perspective, you could still think about it as it suggests that maybe we're a little too confident in our own ability to do right or wrong without any guidance, which is an interesting question. So a few things to finish up. David Brooks emphasizes, like the quote before, that we are mixed bags and we have to work at restraining the worst parts of ourselves and helping the better parts of ourselves. And if you think about that, are you better able to be a good person in a religious context? Are you more likely to be good if you are religious? A lot of people think so. You can certainly be a moral atheist, but as Greg Koukl says, a moral atheist is like a man sitting down to dinner who doesn't believe in farmers, ranchers, fishermen, or cooks. Why would you do moral things as an atheist if you don't believe that morality is an objective system that has any validity? If you're not going to be punished for it, if you can get away with it, then why not just do it? It's an interesting question. And so I think this idea here generally is, what purpose does morality serve in your own life? Do you think about this regularly? Do you think about being a good person and how you can really do that on a daily basis? Is it just having good people around you? Do you believe in good and evil? And if you do believe in good and evil, then where does that concept come from? So these are big questions, again, that I want you to throw around. And if you're working virtually, try to take 3 or 4 of these questions and address them in the group that you're in.